am Daniel and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest, no other than Dr. Vivien Sieber. Hello, Miss Vivien. Can you please introduce yourself?
Well, I'm Vivien Sieber. I trained as a geneticist and did research at a number of British universities. And then I moved into teaching, introducing technology into teaching. Then I retired. I discovered this suitcase of letters between my grandmother and my father, some photographs of my family that my father had just put into big envelopes in a cardboard box, and he'd sort of labeled them Paula, Peter's mother, Peter, Peter, and Herman, Peter's dad. And so I had that. And when he died, my dad left some unpublished manuscripts. There was also a file with correspondence with girls who had been saved on the Kindertransport that my grandmother had cared for during the war. So I began to put all this together. I'd always known that they were Jewish refugees from Vienna and that my father and grandmother had escaped in 1938 to England as penniless refugees. I'd also known that my grandmother had been the assistant matron in a hostel for girls saved on the Kindertransport. So the next stage was we went to Vienna, and amazingly we visited the flat that had been my grandmother's, and our hosts were really kind and had already been to the archives, so they knew much of the story. It just became a quest to find out what had happened, and then that turned into my book.
Congratulations, Miss Vivien. So, Kino and Kinder, what behind the title of your book?
Well, it starts with my great grandparents who were drapers in Brno. And then in 1950, my grandmother married. She was very small and very pretty, very beautiful, and had this huge personality. And so she married the first man who'd take her to Vienna. And it was a complete disaster. He was a lot older than her. He led a dissolute life. She had a baby and then discovered he was unfaithful. So she sort of jumped on a train with the baby back and went back to her parents in Brno. And this is a bit none of us can understand. She persuaded her family that what they really needed was a cinema in Vienna. And they had 3 shops in the main square in Brno and knew about draping. They didn't know anything about cinemas. But in 1915, she and her sister went to the cinema in Vienna, and they were very successful. She was the public face. I think her sister was the sensible one who checked the coal was ordered and counted the ticket stubs. Along came my grandfather, Herman, was a lawyer. And then, of course, my dad comes along, Peter. And I've got these absolutely lovely pictures of my grandmother when she went to Vienna balls with baby Peter in posh nursing home. But tragically, Herman was killed in a road traffic accident after only 6 years. So Paula went on working in the cinema and bringing her sons up. But then the Nazis arrived and they watched Hitler's triumphal procession into Vienna. And she realized that she'd have to send her child to safety. Now, his half brother was already in London. So she sent him to London and was eventually followed herself with great difficulty. And she got this job looking after the girls from the Kindertransport. And he went to university, was interned on the Isle of Man and Canada, and was then the first enemy alien to serve in the Royal Navy and Naval Intelligence. Very much the second half of the book is I was lucky enough to meet some of the old ladies who were the kinder in the hostel, and they were fantastically generous and told me what it was like leaving their families. They were very young children, some of them, adjusting to life in a foreign country and to life in a hostel. And so that very much their stories become the second half of the book. And then the end bit is I try and work out what happened to the cinema, first of all, under the Nazis, and my grandmother's fight to get it back.
So, Miss Vivien, Kino means,
Cinema,
and Kinder is.
children, because the cinema was called the Palast Kino on Josefstadtstrasse in Vienna. And Kinder comes from the Kindertransport, which was the children's transport scheme, where children were taken to mainline railway stations in Germany and the occupied countries like Austria and Czechoslovakia, and they were separate. They traveled alone, accompanied by adults, but they weren't related to them, uh, to England, where they were either went into hostels or some went to family homes, and it's the Kinder transport scheme. So that's where Kinder comes from.
Oh, sounds interesting, Miss Vivien. What are your struggles in writing Kino and Kinder?
Was realizing when I started looking at what had happened to my grandmother's family that were left behind in Vienna, because all but none of them, only one survived. So it was finding out that they died in concentration camps. And I mean, it's possible to trace when they were arrested and deported, and the documents are there, but their suffering is unimaginable.
How many chapters of Kino and Kinder?
It's got 19 chapters.
For those 19 chapters, what chapter did you enjoy the most?
I think in some ways, the bits where I met the Kinder, and where, although what they were saying was harrowing, it was the whole thing of meeting these lovely, these amazing women, and writing, reporting what they'd written.
Yes, indeed. So before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening in Austria because the book that you wrote is happened in Austria, in Vienna. I got 72%. Duncan, Austria. Styria at 9%, Vorarlberg at 6%, Upper Austria 3%, Carinthia at 3%, Salzburg at 3%, and last but not the least, Burgenland at 3%. Dankeschön, Austria, for supporting this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world, like Miss Vivien Sieber. So, Miss Vivien, what is the best highlight of Kino and Kinder?
Well, possibly it's got lots of photographs that are original, that are old historic photographs that are rather unique. Possibly the bits that where I found testimony my father wrote that while during the war. There's some wartime photographs as well.
Have you read another biographical Holocaust book like Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning? What's the big difference of your book to that Holocaust book?
I think in some ways mine's different in that it's the stories of lots of different people. Because although it's got my grandmother and my father, it's got what happened to my grandmother's family, her brothers and sisters. It's got the lives of the girls in the hostel. It's got the cinema as well. There are very few books about cinemas that have been confiscated by the Nazis.
What do you think a big lesson that we learned from the Holocaust?
Don't do it again. And that it's very easy to slide into losing democracy and losing freedom. And it can happen in Austria's case, very suddenly, in Germany's case, more slowly. And you can go from normal life to utter horror very quickly.
They said that history repeats itself. Do you think this nightmare will come again?
I think there's always a risk. I think there's a risk when you have any extreme government. So whether it's extremely right wing or extremely left wing, yes, I think you can see freedoms being eroded, and you can see groups, not necessarily Jews, being persecuted. There's always been some sort of persecution going on, whether it's the Ouija, whether it's Rohingya, throughout my life, there's always been groups that have been marginalized.
What do you think, in what ways that we prevent this history will come back to us?
I think we have to know we have to know about it. We have to know about it in a fair and honest way. And we have to know that we have to protect judiciary and parliamentary systems and all the other things that protect democracy. We have to respect people for being different.
Yes, very well said, Miss Vivian. So let's talk about the main character of Kino and Kinder. What you can say about it?
Well, I just hope people will read it and will enjoy it. Or maybe enjoy is not the right word, but we'll find it interesting. And maybe we'll get them to think about more about how to avoid things like the Holocaust.
Okay, and do you think Kino and Kinder will spark? It will give highlight.
Yes, if you look on yes, it's got a website. It's the website is www. Sieber, that's VIVIENSIEBER.eu. So there's bits, you've got the index and some of the pictures and the author's blurb on that. Or if you look on Amazon, you can see the first few chapters because it's available on Kindle.
Yes, and according to Michael Singer, excellent story and easy read. So how did you do to your book that it easy to read and they said it's excellent?
Yes, that was very kind of him.
So what are the elements that you put in the story that make your book excellent and easy to read?
Well, I think it's got strands for everybody because you've got strands describing the experience of people in Britain of the Second World War. So you've got some testimony about being in the Navy or testimony about being interned in the Isle of Man and Canada. You've got bits about just the effect of rationing. And yet you've also got, I try to sort of tell the story and explain it on the scaffold of the history and the events that were happening. So I've explained.
According to P.W. Hodges, an interesting and important account of a Jewish family's experience in Prague, Vienna, and London. So there are three places in the book itself.
Oh, yes, because we went to Brno and well, I actually met my grandmother's niece in Brno in the 90s, just when the Berlin Wall came down, and she'd survived one of the camps. She'd survived Theresienstadt, and then we went back again in about 10-15 years ago. And of course, Brno had changed from being a city that had been run by the communists, so it was very dilapidated and messed around, to now it's a vibrant, modern Western city. But of course, that meant we could do research while we were there. Again, Vienna, we went to the grandmother's flat and we went to the archives. And I have to say that the state and city archives have been quite astounding, sending me bushels of papers, doing really big searches for me. And without that information, it would have been difficult to put the book together.
Yes,
We
go ahead.
went to the flat where my grandmother and father first came to when they first escaped to England. And of course, the two hostels, the Windermere one in particular, and the first one was actually in Tynemouth, and I've been to that now as well.
And according to Cheryl Polepsuk, fascinating and personal account of a Jewish family's journey through World War II. Before we go on, Miss Vivian, I'm inviting you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, on our third season with Chef Alessandro, one of the best executive chef in one of the best restaurants in downtown Toronto. And listen to our latest episode, Gelato, people, because Summer is hot, hot, hot. So please do listen. Food 101 plus one more. Our book Food 101 Volume 1 Basics is all available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. It's all about the basics that you need in the kitchen to make your food delicious. Plus, we did also volume 2, which is fundamentals, volume 3, essentials, volume 4, Greek cuisine, volume 5, Japanese cuisine, and volume 6, Spanish cuisine, and more volumes to come, people. So please do grab a copy and support us. So, Miss Vivian, can you please invite our listeners to buy your book?
Oh, yes, please.
So,
Just
Miss
buy my one book, Kino and Kinder, The Family's Journey in the Shadow of the Holocaust.
Yes, Miss Vivian, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Bodycom people, see you soon.